So here is your list. I'm not going to go through 145 sites. Some of them are black sites. Some of them are bases you know about, like Wright-Patterson, Edwards, Nellis, Area 51, so-called. But all of them are based on witness testimony and intelligence we've gathered over the last 30 years. And it's time for it to be disclosed.
Recently in 2024, Stephen Greer and the Disclosure Project released their entire catalog of documents, communication logs, drawings, and other files. Love him or hate him, over the years, Greer has provided valuable witnesses a platform to speak, and wrote, in my opinion, a truly fantastic piece of work, his 2001 disclosure briefing document. So while I have my problems with Greer, this document archive absolutely commands my attention. Greer's list of UFO whistleblowers and witnesses features over 700 names, many of which are redacted. Here we find names we all expect: Michael Herrera, the late Dr. Robert Wood, Richard Doty, Robert Salas, Jonathan Weygandt, even Bob Lazar. But we also find 22 pages of redacted names. Some of these names are described simply as points of contact to others, but some have descriptions that might be well worth our attention. Viewers of my channel may remember UFO Witnesses Redacted list, in which I derived the names and contacted 2 of these witnesses from poorly redacted documents uploaded by Greer. One such witness, MS, agreed to interview on UFO testing occurring at Dugway Proving Grounds, while the other witness, TB, was much more shadowy. Today we cover the redacted entry that has captivated my attention and commanded my research for months on end. A witness I have been more than eager to cover, as I believe this witness's alleged first-hand experiences with UFO reverse engineering offer crucial insights into DoD and defense contractor involvement with UFO programs. Hey guys, it's UAP Gerb, and thank you so much for joining me today. I am beyond excited to cover another witness in Stephen Greer's redacted list, witness 11063, who makes claims of testing UAP reverse engineered technology and craft at Edwards Air Force Base, California. Grab your pencils and notebooks, because we have a tremendous amount of research to conduct and avenues to explore from 2 simple documents on this former wing commander at Edwards. And before we get started, guys, full disclaimer, I have been able to ascertain this individual's identity and have tried to contact him through myriad methods. Should he ever respond and be willing to go public, I will go to any lengths to speak with him. But for operational security and his family's safety, I will not burn witness 11063's identity. I have also attempted to encourage this individual to testify before Congress or contact the Senate Intelligence Committee. For this project, I will only be using publicly available sources. No classified or hidden information will be disclosed in this video. And I would like to say I have thoroughly vetted this individual through public online resources and can confirm his Air Force station at Nellis Air Force Base, Edwards Air Force Base, and the Pentagon, as well as various positions within the US Air Force as stated by Greer. I first took note of witness 11063, who I will further refer to as Ed, when Dr. Greer released his witness list. This astonishing entry reads, quote, Career Air Force Nellis Edwards, Test Director of Electronics Warfare Group, tested reverse engineered technology, was at the Pentagon DOE, Wing Commander at Edwards, contacted us in 2023, end quote. Unlike MS, TB, and myriad other witnesses, no communications or files existed on Ed at the initial release of the DPI archive files. It wasn't until late summer of 2024 the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive updated an additional section of documents, intelligence briefing modules, that we would get our first leads on Ed. Within this section, we find Module 3 under UFO crash retrievals titled, quote, Covert Government Retrieval and Handling ET Vehicles, end quote. Analyzing the executive summary, we find some fascinating information adapted from a March 2024 oral presentation from Greer. Not only does Greer discuss 130 plus instances of NHI objects being downed and retrieved involving major defense contractors such as Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works, and Boeing, but these operations are conducted using advanced electrogravitic technologies and electromagnetic pulse EMP weapons. I do highly recommend reading through the entirety of this module, as it invokes the quality of the 2001 disclosure briefing document, and also makes mention of witness MS and Richard Foch, a former Naval Research Lab senior scientist who discussed large, silent, triangular alien reproduction vehicles over remote areas of Dugway Proving Grounds. Towards the end of Module 3, we see our first discussion of Ed outside the witness list. Quote, a lieutenant colonel who managed pilots at Edwards Air Force Base and is responsible for training pilots who operated man-made UFOs, has expressed his willingness to share his information openly. Dr. Greer introduced him to the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services Committee, where he shared information. He is also eager to testify openly before the House Oversight Committee, though responses from key members like Reps. Luna and Burchett have not yet been received. Having left the Air Force in 2009, the lieutenant colonel was extensively briefed on operations not just at Edwards but also at Nellis and Area 51. He believes that since the operations he was involved in were illegal, he is free to discuss them publicly and is ready to disclose everything he knows in an open hearing under oath, end quote. It was around the time of the upload of this module, Greer finally uploaded 2 documents under Witness 11063. First, let's analyze what I would consider to be the less impactful of the 2 documents on Ed to understand his background and motives for contacting Greer in late 2023. In presumably an internal disclosure project email, an unknown individual emailed Greer stating witness Ed had been following Greer's work for some time and wished to answer Greer's call for whistleblowers. This DPI employee states Ed served in USAF from 1999 to his early retirement in 2015, where he ended his career. According to the email, Ed additionally came from an engineering background, worked with the Department of Energy, and served at the Pentagon for 7 years. The email accurately breaks down Ed's service record: 3 years at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, 3 years at Hanscom Air Force Base, Massachusetts, and 5 years at Edwards Air Force Base, California. In 2006, Ed was sent to Edwards AFB for the base's test pilot school. It was here Ed would claim pilots at the Air Force Base are trained for unacknowledged special access programs using reverse-engineered non-human technology. Side note, Edwards is well known for its prolific and prestigious test pilot school. This highly selective program trains pilots, navigators, and engineers on experimental flight platforms. Originating from the Air Force Material Command's 412th Test Wing, the test pilot school's mission is to, quote, conduct full-spectrum tests and evaluations of aerospace weapons, and to be the world's premier educational and training center for theoretical and applied flight test engineering, end quote. An additional point, the test pilot school originated out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base during World War II. During his time at Edwards, after graduating the USAF's highly selective test pilot school, Ed would serve as the head of an electronic warfare group that tested NHI reverse-engineered technology. In this role, Ed claimed to serve as the intermediary between engineers who had direct reporting to him and test pilots when, quote, they had a manned craft they were testing, end quote. Interesting to point out here, according to the email, Ed agrees with Dr. Greer's stance on free energy systems from direct first-hand involvement in various projects. A little bit of context here: since the late 90s, early 2000s, Greer has highlighted issues of suppressed technologies and systems levied from the reverse engineering of off-world technologies. These technologies are famously referred to as zero-point energy systems. To quote the 2001 disclosure document, quote, we have identified insiders and scientists who can prove in open congressional hearings that we do in fact possess classified energy generation and anti-gravity propulsion systems capable of completely and permanently replacing all forms of current used energy generation and transport systems. These devices access the ambient electromagnetic and so-called zero-point energy state to produce vast amounts of energy without any pollution. Such systems essentially generate energy by tapping into the ever-present quantum vacuum energy state, the baseline energy from which all energy and matter is fluxing. All matter and energy is supported by this baseline energy state, and it can be tapped through unique electromagnetic circuits and configurations to generate huge amounts of energy from space-time all around us. These are not perpetual motion machines, nor do they violate the laws of thermodynamics. They merely tap an ambient energy field all around us to generate energy, end quote. Zero-point and free energy systems are not the topic of today's video, so I recommend reading The Hunt for Zero-Point by author Nick Cook, Jesse Michaels' video Aerospace Secret Search for Anti-Gravity, or even Greer's 2023 documentary The Lost Century and How to Reclaim It. And it is interesting and worth noting that this internal disclosure project email states Ed is in complete agreement with Greer's stance on free energy. Ed isn't the only witness to comment on zero-point systems either. Take redacted entry 10747 for example, who is stated to be an ex-chairman and VP of a well-known corporation. I have high conviction this company is General Electric. According to Greer, 10747 has, quote, huge details and testimony regarding free energy and the military-industrial complex cover-up / suppression of these technologies. Knows several people killed and scared to death, end quote. Towards the end of our witness testimony internal email, mention is made Ed had been tracking current legislation relating to legacy program member amnesty and would be willing to testify to Arrow as long as Kirkpatrick was removed from the organization because, according to Ed, the good doctor, quote, is an insider and is meant to squash information, end quote. This is indeed a very charged statement and one I am sure many UFO investigators will agree with based off the actions of Sean Kirkpatrick.
And the way you combat conspiracy theories and the associated misunderstandings that fuel them is with fact and science and truth. So if you've got evidence for a conspiracy, then that helps to investigate what the underlying truth is. There has been none that has been substantiated for this. And everything that has been brought to our attention and everything that was brought to my attention when I was in that position as the director, we investigated and discovered that it did not come from where they thought it came from. Most everything was explainable through other documentation, other programs, other people that had talked to other people.
It goes without saying Dr. K has very little goodwill with the public. Like the lies and half-hearted debunks in the Arrow Historical Report Volume 1 or Arrow's 2022 contracts with Sandcorp, a company built to plug whistleblower leaks. I have even made an entire video on Sean Kirkpatrick and his disinformation, which is at this point somewhat outdated as it covered little of Kirkpatrick's role as an unpaid consultant after leaving Arrow. So let's briefly cover a new revelation that supports Ed's accusations of the doctor injecting misinformation into the public. Well, in a recent US Space Command FOIA release by Twitter user tag_OM, we can find a January 2023 meeting scheduled by Dr. Kirkpatrick involving US Spacecom and senior US Joint Command staff. The purpose of this meeting was, quote, UAP response and recovery and material transfer, end quote. The witness testimony document gives us a brief overview of Ed, his background and motives, but our next document is where our true research can begin. This 2-page set of notes roughly covers a phone conversation between Dr. Greer and Ed on November 25th, 2023. Not only do these notes describe Ed's testimony in depth, but also break down his military career by year and station. The document is absolutely worth going through line by line. Off the bat, Ed asks Greer if he has threatened legal action against Lockheed and Boeing, as Ed was read into programs overlapping these two companies. At the beginning of his Air Force career, Ed did indeed work with Lockheed as a range technical contractor in the early 2000s at Nellis Air Force Base, along with some other smaller specialized contractors. However, there is no mention of Boeing to the best of my knowledge in his work history. Publicly, we can find myriad projects and current job openings for work between Lockheed and Nellis Air Force Base, but there are a few of extreme interest here. Check out this Lockheed Martin case study titled The Importance of Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance, in which the contractor was tasked with updating the system used by USAF Warfare Center for Intelligence Collection and Processing. Lockheed Martin reconfigured a 2-phase security classification system used by the National Geospatial Intelligence System, yes, the same agency Grush was a part of when liaison to the UAP task force, and the same agency recently mentioned by respected journalist Chris Sharp as participating in undersea UAP crash retrievals. The system was implemented to Combined Air and Space Operations Center at Nellis Air Force Base, which is tasked with processing information for exploitation of time-sensitive targets. I can't help but speculate here. Although this Lockheed project arose from challenges in the Nellis Red Flag Advanced Aerial Combat Training exercise, could such systems be used to monitor UAP and UAP crash retrievals? The idea Ed was read into UAP programs at Nellis Air Force Base as a first lieutenant from 1999 to 2002 can possibly be reinforced later in the notes where Greer states Ed was briefed at Area 51 S4, where, quote, a major said they had caught/captured lots of aircraft, end quote. This small point will later become even more interesting as we learn the Area 51 Groom Lake facility is administered by a detachment from Edwards Air Force Base, California. the base where Ed would transfer to and conduct the bulk of his first-hand work around UAP programs. Ed states this briefing was conducted via a 30-minute video which showed inspection aircraft that were essentially invisible. Inspection craft, what exactly does this mean? Is Ed referring to crash retrievals or possibly alien reproduction vehicles, ARVs, for inspection use only? This reminds me closely of the story of Mark McCandlish, whose close friend Brad Sorensen allegedly saw 3 ARVs titled Fluxliners that were available for cleared personnel to inspect, with paneling removed to highlight hardware of the craft. The line these craft were essentially invisible further supports this thesis, as I have covered first-hand witnesses before that have discussed ARV craft with cloaking mechanisms, craft that look identical to the Fluxliner highlighted by McCandlish. And an interesting detail, according to Sorensen and McCandlish, these ARVs were shown at Norton Air Force Base, a mere 80 miles from Edwards Air Force Base. If you're unfamiliar with the testimony of Mark McCandlish, have no fear, I will cover it soon, as I believe it is one of the most impactful testimonies in all of ufology. Greer goes on to state that at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, Ed worked at Building 200 under the redacted name of the first commander of the 98th Range Wing. Now let's break this down. The 98th Range Wing, now called the Nevada Test and Training Range, began operations in 2001 and serves as the primary military training area for the Nellis Air Force Base complex. To quote USAF, the NTTR is the largest contiguous air and ground space available for peacetime military operations in the free world. The range occupies 2.9 million acres of land, 5,000 square miles of airspace, which is restricted from civilian air traffic overflight, end quote. The Nevada Test and Training Range NTTR provides the warfighter a flexible, realistic, and multi-dimensional battle space to conduct testing tactics development and advanced training in support of U.S. national interests while also conducting Department of Energy testing, research, and development. Quote, the NTTR coordinates operational and support matters with major commands, other services, DOE, and Department of Interior, as well as other federal, state, and local government agencies. The NTTR acts as the single point of contact for range customers, end quote. Analyzing the NTTR and its mission to create, operate, and maintain live and synthetic environments and integrate partners to optimize warfighter capabilities, this location sounds like an ideal choice for DoD and USG elements alongside contractors to test reverse engineered technology. To top it off, the NTTR South Range contains Groom Lake Area 51, a location deeply entwined with ufology. His time at Building 200 at the NTTR may have seen Ed interact with Boeing, Lockheed Martin, alongside the DOE, which I mentioned I could find no record of in his resume. Circling back to the call notes, Greer made specific note to Ed serving under the first commander right around 2001 of the 98th Range Wing, or NTTR. I have tried at length and failed to find the original commander of the 98th, but I would like to take a long hard look at the commander from 2005 to 2007, Colonel Christopher Have. I find this analysis necessary as Ed may have implied the 98th commander has oversight to UAP reverse engineering programs. Colonel Have spent 26 years in the Air Force linked to key roles in fighter aviation. His post-service resume is of heavy interest here. Following the Air Force and his service in the 98th Range Wing, Have directed global trade controls at Boeing in Washington, D.C., handling trade policy and technology licensing within major government departments. Have additionally led a team at Raytheon Technologies, another defense contractor implicated with UAP study. Here, the colonel managed relationships with key USG officials, such as the Office of the Secretary of Defense and other military departments, aligning Raytheon strategies within government objectives. The colonel also served as a special advisor on national security affairs to then Vice President Dick Cheney, who has seen swirls of rumors recently implicating Cheney as a senior member of UFO programs, where Have offered insights on foreign defense capabilities. Have's resume, as well as his role as commander of the 98th Range Wing, offers us a glimpse at a possible reverse engineering program official. And speaking of the NTTR, in Greer's notes we can find a simple sentence, quote, Ed saw man-made craft on the range, was there quite a bit, end quote. With strong conviction, we can assume the range in question here is the NTTR. From this statement, we can also gauge that Ed is claiming Area 51/S4 and/or Nellis Air Force Base has successful, man-made reverse-engineered craft. Greer then comments on Ed being sent to Edwards Air Force Base in California in 2006 for range orientation, where Ed would go on to serve as director of Redacted for an electronic warfare group. Referencing the witness testimony document, we can assume this director role was a test director for a technology reverse engineering group. We can also assume from witness testimony this station followed Ed's service in Edwards Test Pilot School. What bolsters these claims from Ed is the fact Edwards' electronic warfare group stems from the 412th Test Wing, the exact same wing that houses the Edwards USAF Test Pilot School. If Ed's testimony is true, the 412th Test Wing out of Edwards directly deals with the testing of reverse-engineered craft and technology of non-human origin. This would also mean the 412th Reverse Engineering Program works in conjunction with the Nevada Test and Training Range. This is one of the biggest takeaways of this entire research project. If his testimony is true, Ed was briefed on UAP programs at S4 while stationed at Nellis, where he was then sent to the 412 Test Pilot School and Test Wing to further this work in an Air Force Legacy UFO program as a test director. The documents state Ed served at Nellis until 2002 and was then sent to Edwards in 2006. Where was Ed during this gap? This period of time, 2002 to 2005, saw Ed stationed at Hanscom Air Force Base near Boston, Massachusetts. Greer writes that Ed worked with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology while at Hanscom, working on foreign military assets, but only saw terrestrial craft. This mention of MIT is still of great interest to us. I have talked before about the involvement of UARC or university-affiliated research centers with UAP programs many times. Most recently with Dr. Eric A. Walker, head of Penn State's UARC, the Applied Research Laboratory, who admitted he was involved in the Kecksburg UFO crash incident. Well, MIT has their own UARC operating under the US Army as well, the Institute for Soldier Nanotechnologies, whose goal is to, quote, discover and field technologies that dramatically improve the protection, survivability, and mission capabilities of the warfighter and of warfighter supporting platforms and systems, end quote. The only mention I can find of relation between Hanscom and UAP is an anonymous letter sent to Leonard Stringfield dated March 14, 1975, which claimed to recount the testimony of one Colonel Sims, a pseudonym. According to the letter, both Hanscom and MIT are two of the military bases and research laboratories that perform UFO operations, alongside Edwards, Wright-Patterson, Carswell, Los Alamos, Sandia, etc. Okay, so Ed served at Edwards from 2006 to 2010, where he was allegedly formally read into multiple quote-unquote advanced aircraft programs at Edwards. The use of the word formal here is quite interesting, almost like Ed's time at Nellis saw him getting bits and pieces of program information while his role as test director saw a complete briefing. This echoes numerous claims that UAP reverse engineering programs are as if not more compartmentalized than the Manhattan atomic bomb project. Greer writes in 2008, when director of a redacted program, Ed was part of a go public plan via the Air Force. The plan was called off in 2009 to 2010 and saw Ed move to the Pentagon. The killing of the program was done by a 2-star general. Now, I have found no confirming evidence of this so-called go public plan, but I have found a series of USAF 2-star generals, aka Major Generals, that either retired as Major Generals or were at the time period of interest that may give us an answer. One prime suspect is Major General Thomas K. Anderson, who reached the rank of Major General in 2009 and retired in 2013. Anderson's senior role oversaw him serving as commander of the Curtis E. LeMay Center for Doctrine, Development, and Education. To quote the Air Force, quote, "The center is responsible for the research, development, and production of Air Force doctrine and input for joint and multinational doctrine development activities," end quote. General Anderson oversaw numerous key positions within DoD, such as the Air Staff, Joint Staff, Combat Command Staffs, NATO, and Chief of Staff and Director of Intelligence for U.S. Strategic Command. Let us also inspect Major General Eugene Haas, who served as Brigadier General during our window 2009 to 2010 before being promoted to Major General in 2012. Haas served as Vice Commander, Air Force Special Operations Command from 2009 to 2011. Haas additionally acted as Director for Force Structure, Requirements, Resources, and Strategic Assessment as a J-8. Haas commanded my interest due to his extremely prestigious role within DoD and stationed at 2 Air Force bases allegedly connected to UAP programs, MacDill Air Force Base and Fort Belvoir, Virginia. Moving on, I would like to look at Major General KCD Blake, who earned his Major Generalship in 2015 and served as a colonel during Ed's alleged disclosure plan. Not only did General Blake work as commander to Air Force Installations Contracting Agency of Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, but his most senior position saw Blake as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Contracting, under the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Air Force for Acquisition in Washington, D.C. Here he was responsible for, quote, all aspects of contracting relating to the acquisition of weapon systems, logistics, and operational support for the Air Force, end quote, overseeing support of $826 billion annually. Although Blake may have been a colonel during this plan, he piqued my interest as during 2008 he served as Director, Program Acquisitions, Defense Procurement and Acquisition Policy in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics for the Pentagon. There are a total of 4 other major generals of interest here, including C. Donald Alston, H. Brent Blake Sr., Randy A. Key. But I want to lastly focus on Major General Christopher P. Azzano. Azzano did not earn his major generalship until 2019, meaning during 2009 to 2010, he is the least likely candidate to have decision-making power over a disclosure campaign. However, his early career dovetails almost identically with that of Ed and is worth mentioning. In the year 2000, Azzano attended USAF test pilot school at, you guessed it, Edwards. In the early 2010s, the general would command the 412th Operations Group at Edwards, before serving as the commander of the Air Force Test Center at Edwards. At his senior station, Azzano oversaw a $31 billion enterprise comprising of more than 19,000 military, civilian, and contractor personnel across Edwards, Eglin, and Arnold AFBs. Greer makes special note to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the infamous location we have discussed in almost every single video I have ever done. According to Ed, Wright-Patterson has a tight connection with Edwards. Ed even makes an educated guess Wright-Pat's Hangar 6, specifically held biologics. According to internal Wright-Pat documents, Hangar 6 was initially, quote, primarily used by the Signal Corps for installing radios and antennas, and after the war it became a facility for retrofitting and modifying planes, end quote. The hangar featured several smaller doors instead of a giant hangar door, which would later be used as the Wright Field Fitness Center. However, the fitness center is located in Hangar 22, not Hangar 6 at Wright-Pat. Besides blueprints and images of the exterior, I can find almost zero internal images, reports, or articles in general on Hangar 6. This facility will be a priority of my research moving forward, especially analyzing for infrastructure to support living and/or deceased biologics, as Ed has claimed. From 2010 to 2015, following the failed Coming Forward plan, Ed moved to the Pentagon, where according to Greer, he operated within Research and Development Panel Chain. Little was discussed between Greer and Ed on his responsibilities at the Pentagon. However, one interesting note is recorded, quote, $34 billion, then $40 billion to non-Air Force authorization, non-blue TOA, end quote. TOA meaning transfer of authority. This statement seemingly confirms statements made over the decades by numerous whistleblowers discussing UAP programs being funded through USAP off-book black operations. I will draw your attention to December 11, 2017, where former Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Catherine Austin Fitts published a paper titled Black Budget of the United States. Here she discussed $21 trillion found in unauthorized spending in the Department of Defense and Housing and Urban Development Centers between 1998 and 2015. Soon after publication, the DoD announced its first ever department-wide independent audit. Fitts personally believed some unauthorized funding was utilized for domestic, clandestine military R&D, some of which was illegal UAP programs from DoD. The primary testimony of Ed involves first-hand work on UAP programs focused on the testing of reverse-engineered non-human technology at Nellis Air Force Base / Area 51 S4 and the 412th Test Group out of Edwards Air Force Base, California. As we have discussed before, numerous factors including Ed being briefed at S4 and then sent to the 412th for test pilot school before becoming director of the Electronic Warfare Group, where he acted as the intermediary between engineers and test pilots when the group had manned craft to test, we can conclude with high confidence Ed's work revolved primarily around the utilization of NHI tech to construct and test ARV or alien reproduction vehicles. Area 51 S4 has been discussed in ufology for decades and is often immediately associated with the claims of Bob Lazar. But what about Edwards? Are there any other stories of UAP programs at the Californian base that can support or detract from Ed's claims? Well, for starters, we can go all the way back to 1957 to the testimony of Mercury astronaut Gordon Cooper. Cooper claimed while stationed as a project manager at Edwards Air Force Base, a group of photographers assigned to photograph remote positions of the base observed a large, strange-looking craft above a lake bed. Cooper's crew began taking films of the craft, and according to Cooper, the craft was, quote, hovering above the ground, and then it slowly came down and sat on the lake bed for a few minutes, end quote. The camera crew estimated the object to be about 30 feet in diameter, shiny silver in color, and featured 3 landing gear. The crew got within 20 yards of the craft before it departed. Cooper did in fact see the film, but stated the evidence was confiscated. And this is a very brief summary of this story, as I would love to cover it further in great detail.
Well, that was I was having some cameramen film the installation of a precision landing facility that we were putting in right out on the edge of the dry lake, and this saucer flew right over them and put down 3 little gear and landed out on the dry lake bed. And they went out to picked up their cameras and moved on out toward him filming. And he lifted off, put the gear back in the well, and climbed out at a very high rate of speed and disappeared. And so while I was going through all the regulation books and finding out the number to call in Washington to report it, I had them go over and develop the film. By the time they got back with the developed film, I was on the higher and higher and higher level officer talking to me. Finally, with the colonel telling me to, when the film arrived at my desk, to put it in the carrier pouch. There would be a courier there at my office by that time already, and they'd arranged for him to fly in our base airplane back to Washington with these films, and do not run prints, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we stuck them in the courier pouch.
Did you watch the film?
We didn't have a chance to run it. I had a chance to hold it up to the window and look at it. It was certainly good film.
Good close-up shots?
Good close-up shot.
In 1972, we can find Project Outgrowth out of the USAF Rocket Propulsion Lab at Edwards. A document titled Advanced Propulsion Concepts Project Outgrowth sees discussion of an anti-gravity program and theoretical material to change the direction and amplitude of gravitational fields. Similarly, in 1988, a technical report submitted under contract with the USAF Aeronautics Lab out of Edwards discusses the exploration of the Byfield-Brown effect explored at length by Jesse Michaels, which allegedly converts electrostatic energy into propulsion. Around the same year, 1988, defense contractor Science Applications International Corporation, SAIC, a defense contractor I have directly implicated in the study of off-world technologies, studied similar electronic propulsion mechanisms for Edwards Air Force Base. We can also look to 1990, where journalist Scott Williams wrote an article in Aviation Week in which 45 sightings of aircraft accelerating from near-hovering positions to supersonic speeds were seen over Edwards Air Force Base, George Air Force Base, and China Lake Naval Weapons Center. One such craft was described as triangular in shape. But let's not forget the 1998 testimony of USAF Master Sergeant Edgar Fausch I have covered numerous times, who commented on the infamous TR-3B reverse-engineered triangular craft. Fausch claimed while working at the Defense Advanced Research Board in 1979 under the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at Edwards, a full anti-gravity propulsion system was developed and a secret space fleet utilized this technology. If you haven't yet, please watch my video on Lockheed Martin, as I discuss the Fausch case in much greater depth, including his station at the proposed Defense Advanced Research Center. While discussing the TR-3B craft, Fausch makes specific mention graduates from the 412th Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base pilot these reverse-engineered craft. Many more enigmatic claims without direct evidence exist surrounding Edwards. The infamous base was mentioned myriad times within Leonard Stringfield's crash retrieval status reports 1 through 7. In UFO crash retrievals, the Inner Sanctum, status report 6, Stringfield makes mention of a Dr. Epigoni, a pseudonym for a physicist who claimed to have worked closely with Oppenheimer, Einstein, and Teller. Epigoni stated in the late 60s, early 70s he worked on something called Project Heaven, a special project at Edwards Air Force Base. The doctor claimed a flying saucer and its crew had previously landed at Edwards. The craft was kept in a large hangar guarded tightly whilst occupants were carted off to a secure building for evaluation. The 12 5-foot-tall bodies clad in silvery metal suits featured eyes of one color, a nose, a mouth, teeth, and blood similar to the appearance of oil. To quote Epigoni, quote, "They, the US researchers, came to the conclusion that since there was no deterioration, to leave them alone because another craft might come in the area and rejuvenate or reactivate them," end quote. The craft itself had no rivets, seams, or welding, and was of a classic saucer design with a dome on top measuring 40 feet in diameter. Other scientists informed Epigoni craft materials were made of materials they never dreamed could exist, and could not figure out a way to gain entry to the craft. Epigoni stated as of 1990, Project Blue Heaven was still active. It was run by the DoD, and the Navy had 2 to 3 similar projects. The doctor's account is far more detailed, and I promise we will circle back to this testimony in future projects, but the landing of this craft and seemingly inert bodies reminds me closely of the craft donation theory.
When you say crash retrieval, what do you mean?
These are retrieving non-human origin technical vehicles, call it spacecraft if you will, non-human, exotic origin vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
How many?
Quite a number.
You're kidding.
No.
The strangest detail of this testimony is the claim the craft touched down, the beings walked out of the craft and laid on the ground. It's worth noting, and Stringfield commented on this too, Epigoni changed the body count from 12 to 4. According to Stringfield and his fellow investigator, they quote, agreed that it appeared that he had consulted with his superiors and was advised to alter certain key details, end quote. Also in 1991, Status Report 6, Stringfield recounts his discussions with a first-hand witness to a UFO crash retrieval 15 miles outside of Edwards in 1971. According to witness Debbie Clayton, her and her girlfriend's family investigated a crash from the sky in broad daylight. Reaching the craft site, Debbie observed an acorn-shaped craft with an extremely similar description to the Kecksburg crash. Quote, "We searched for markings but found only some old scratches that we could not read. Because it was upright, we couldn't see the bottom. There were no windows or seams, appearing to be made from a one-piece mold. If I remember correctly, it was a dark grayish color with greenish highlights, not a color one normally sees. There was a mild heat coming from the craft, somewhat like a car engine after traveling for an hour. One more thing I thought was strange, there was no dust that clung to the shell. Here in the desert, dust is everywhere and clings to everything," end quote. According to Debbie, an Air Force car and truck arrived within 14 minutes where men with rifles ordered civilians off scene. Lastly, I want to cover an excerpt Michael Schratt discovered in the files of the late Stringfield, which may allow us to directly connect Edwards to operating ARV and NHI craft alongside Area 51 S4. In a letter dated April 5, 1980, one Mr. D. L. Dobbs discussed one M.H., a witness identity Schratt chose not to disclose. M.H. had allegedly performed radio maintenance at the Atomic Proving Ground in Nevada during 1961 to 1963, along with top-secret radio work for USAF. According to M.H., he participated in a top-secret operation at Area 51 titled Project Red Light. Test flights were conducted on a recovered UFO shipped from none other than Edwards Air Force Base. The craft was not conventionally powered and stayed silent during operation. Security was so tight on the project, program personnel were rotated every 6 months. MH claimed to have heard rumors of a West Coast American defense contractor encountering difficulties in many of the components comprising the craft. And lastly, guys, I want to cover a possible connection between reverse engineering programs at Edwards and Nellis/Area 51. In July of 1991, an alleged classified NRO document leaked to the public. This document informed need-to-know groups and operations about civilian flying saucer organizations organizing protests in Nevada. Stephen Greer claimed to have given the document to Admiral Thomas Wilson from the Wilson-Davis memo, which, at the very least, we can confirm the meeting between Greer and Wilson. Allegedly, Wilson told Greer he recognized one of the entities listed and that it was run by a contractor. Addressed in this document includes Royal Ops, Cosmic Ops, Magi Ops, multiple USAF Special Forces divisions in the 26th, 64th, 65th, 527th, Nellis AFOSI, Groom Lake, and Dreamland Area 51 S4, Aquatech and Sea Spray Special Operations Group, and one BLACKJACK team. According to Dr. Stephen Greer, inside sources including a source inside BLACKJACK Control told him of two entities, BLACKJACK Control and BLACKJACK Team. BLACKJACK Control is allegedly a Nellis-based facility participating in reverse engineering, while BLACKJACK Team operates in conjunction with Control but is stationed at Edwards Air Force Base.
So, but the key facilities I want to go through, and there are others. This is a list that I updated it for the president in '09. A very chief one is Edwards Air Force Base, and there's a whole constellation there: Haystack Butte, China Lakes, George Air Force Base, the retired Norton Air Force Base, Tabletop Mountain Observatory, which is run ostensibly by NASA, and BLACKJACK Control. So I had a source at BLACKJACK Control associated with the Edwards related facilities, but the BLACKJACK team you saw on that list was Nellis. So there's BLACKJACK Control and BLACKJACK Team.
I can find almost nothing publicly available to research on BLACKJACK besides a late 2010s, early 2020s project between DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project, and defense contractors owned by Raytheon. Project BLACKJACK was, quote, intended to develop and demonstrate critical elements of a global high-speed network in low Earth orbit that satisfy DoD performance and payload requirements at a much lower cost, with shorter design cycles, and with easier and more frequent technology upgrades, end quote. Seeing as the alleged NRO document dates back to 1991, I doubt these two BLACKJACKs connect. What's going on, guys? It's UAP Gerb, and I'd like to thank each and every single one of you for joining me today as we took a deep dive into Ed's witness testimony. Now, I know I discussed this a multitude of times throughout today's video, but I'd like to reiterate today's thesis once more for a final time. Analyzing Ed's credible witness testimony, conclusions can be drawn of a joint reverse engineering program focused on craft of non-human intelligence existing between Edwards Air Force Base, California, and Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada / Area 51 S4. This program stems out of the 412th Test Group, comprising the Edwards USAF Test Pilot School and Edwards 412th Electronics Warfare Group. Now, this research was some of the most enticing, exciting, and interesting I have done since working on the Off-World Technologies Division, and I would like to compare these two testimonies. The Off-World Technologies Division and the technology here focused more on singular pieces of technology and almost weapons as described by RA. Now, it was interesting to see the juxtaposition between this Air Force testimony as the Air Force plants, in conjunction with Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and possibly other contractors, actually work on the piloting and utilization of reverse engineered craft. Whether these craft are triangular in shape, the classic TR-3B as proposed by Fausch, or possibly the Fluxliner classic saucer shape as proposed by Mark McCandlish that were allegedly housed at Norton Air Force Base 1988, I'm not sure, perhaps it's both. But the line that Fausch states that these pilots commanded the reverse engineered TR-3Bs out of Edwards Air Force Base Pilot Test School jumped out to me after covering him so long ago in my Lockheed Martin video. This research was fascinating. I wish we could find out a little more on Ed's time at the Pentagon. All we really have to go off there is the $34 billion and then $40 billion missing in transfer of authorization funds, off-book funds. This can possibly support Greer's and other people's thesis that many of these programs are funded through black budget operations. I know that this program at Edwards is a very populous base, so if this reverse engineering program is indeed real, this must be kept to an exclusively small number of personnel in an exclusively small area. Who knows? Perhaps Edwards is connected to underground facilities in this region. I know Greer likes to say that the Ant Hill facility he posted a picture of recently and the Helendale facility are dumb locations, so possibly this is a kind of a connected area in which craft are stored. After hearing Ed's testimony, what do you guys think? I would like nothing more than to speak to Ed firsthand and hear all this information from himself, but unfortunately, he has gone off books. There is no way to contact this individual, whether by phone, social media, or email, and believe me, I have tried. So, if Greer is right and this individual has testified revealing information he knows, this testimony is indeed impactful beyond belief. But has he, or is that one of Greer's embellishments? We don't know. I'd like more than anything to see this individual, Ed, before the Senate Intelligence Committee or at November's open hearings. Who knows, maybe we'll be surprised to do so. But let me know what you guys think about this alleged reverse engineering program at Edwards Air Force Base and Nellis Air Force Base Area 51. Again, if anybody has any other further research to let me know about this, I would love to know. I know that I drew a conclusion. I decided not to keep it in the video about the Air Force Plant 42 near Palmdale sightings of late in Edwards. These two facilities are only about 30 miles apart, which, very interesting. I think Edwards and Norton are also only about 80 miles apart, so this whole complex is deeply entwined to both UFO sightings and testimonies of reverse engineering programs. I was also thrilled to be able to dive into the work of Leonard Stringfield and others to look at some more occasions. I know we researched the Debbie Clayton acorn-shaped craft 15 miles outside of Edward that was immediately swarmed by USAF crew within 15 minutes. And the testimony of Dr. Epigoni. That one is very interesting, relating to the craft donation theory. If you don't know what that is, certain individuals like David Grush have discussed that some retrievals of UAP are not crash retrievals. These craft are just found left unattended. This story reminded closely of the alleged 1957 Holloman Air Force Base landing, in which a flying saucer touched down at Holloman Air Force Base and occupants walked out of the craft to interact with USAF personnel. In Epigoni's case, these beings walked out of the craft, laid down on the ground, and seemingly turned themselves off, which could possibly attest to the theory of biological robots, essentially, as many people like to call the Greys. There will be further research that needs to be done on BLACKJACK team and BLACKJACK control. This just rang a note in my head from that 1991 alleged NRO document, but more research needs to be done here. Thus far, I can find no connections between DARPA, really. But this, to me, is the jumping off point of researching USAF legacy and contractor reverse engineering programs, possibly housed at contractor sites, possibly housed at Air Force Base locations. So let me know what you guys think. I really appreciate everybody joining me today. Please remember to like and subscribe, share these videos around. I got a Patreon if you want to join. I don't charge for any extra content. I don't gatekeep content. All of my research is free for anybody to consume. I only have the Patreon if you want to support what you think the channel's worth. But guys, I have some awesome upcoming other projects on ARVs or alien reproduction vehicles, including a deep dive on Mark McCandlish, which I hope to do soon. I know that's been highly requested and I cannot wait to do so. So without further ado, guys, I want to thank you all again for joining me, and very soon we'll be back up with another show. So thank you very much, guys, and I'll catch you all later. Bye.